it's a great honor for me as well, looking at such a stellar panel, which has come from all over the world, and especially a very important partnership between India and UK. So the topic today, which we are going to basically, talk on, is exploring new avenues in craft, a conversation between museums in India and the UK. So the objective is, it's very simple, that post-pandemic, there has been a lot of changes in everything, from each sector. And of course, craft sector has also gone through the similar part of change. But one of the most important things in this change, which I feel is the pivotal part, is which connects past, present to future, is the museum of of all kinds, and museum in specific, which has been actually promoting and presenting and preserving, craft and culture and heritage. So recognizing the diversity across the craft sector in South Asia, museum plays a pivotal role in preserving and showcasing the value of these crafts to different kind of audiences, curated experiences, and most importantly, it supports artists and artisans. Now, post-pandemic, this entire use of technology has actually, come in, and that has changed the way the entire museum experience around the, world that looks like, and in specific to craft sectors as such. So I would like to then now introduce, our very important panel members. So the first panel member is Kamini Sahni, who's a senior museum professional with decades of experiences. And at the moment, she's also been instrumental in bringing together a young and inspiring team at MAP as its first director with the mandate of making the art accessible to all. The second panel, which is again a very, very eminent independent curator, Uttara Rajgopal. She's a specialist in terms of South Asian textiles and textile arts, formerly at Whitworth in Manchester, UK. She has keen interest in South Asian artists and diaspora of building a kind of new collection. And also recently at Whitworth she funded, she's really represented a lot of artists funded by Art Fund. Our another very eminent speaker is Divya Patel. She is a curator in the Asian department of Victoria Albert Museum, London. She specializes in contemporary art and design, popular culture, and photography for South Asia. She's also the trustee of Nehru Trust for the Indian Collection at V&A Museum. She's a co-curator of Fabric of India exhibition that happened in 2015 and 16, and have written a book on contemporary design, which explores fashion, graphics, and interior. And the last, not least, Manisha Jha, who's a self-taught Madhubani artist, hails from Madhubani Mithila region in Bihar. And she's been also, working with a lot of, women artisans in Bihar, support the center to produce and market their work, and has been, she's been selected to be part of aspects of collecting an arts project by SL Museum in Austria. She is a recipient of course, national award. So she's national awardee. So this is very eminent panel which we have. I welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation, which is very, very important because this is beginning of India Craft Week 2021 with this entire discussion. So coming to now, without losing time, I want you to share more insights into it. So my first question to most of the panelists is that this pandemic, pandemic is a favorite word of 2020. In fact, so a little bit of crossover to 21. What has been the impact of the pandemic across museum audiences, artists, curator, viewers, and specifically towards craft sector? So may I request Divya to begin with, and please share your insights into
this. Hello, welcome, and thank you very much for having me on the panel. So the pandemic obviously means for us in the UK, museums have been closed. We're into a third lockdown, and it obviously means that audiences cannot physically experience the museum. But like all institutions and museums, everyone has adapted to the situation and tried to make and do things differently to enable audiences to engage and to access education through the museum. So I'm sure, like all the other panelists, will be talking more about the digital age and talking about how we've tried to harness and enhance some of the experiences that you can't get physically, but you can through technology. So one of the things that we did almost immediately, we do these courses, year-long courses or short courses, and within those courses, because we are the V&A, we always give on-site experiences of close-up experiences of objects. So we give study sessions where the participants can come in and have a look at the objects close up, and we as curators explain them. So we've made that into a digital experience. We've really gone and made special videos, 15 short, maybe 10 minutes each, in which we try and recreate that closeness with the object. So, I've done one on contemporary acquisitions and the recent things we've acquired, but really with the camera going close up and underneath and talking about the objects so people understand what that's about. So all of these experiences, despite, the pandemic is there, we've adapted. And I'm sure the other panelists have similar types of things. So we have to learn to adapt.
Thank you so much. I will now request Uttara to please share what has been their stance in terms of when world was rocked by the event of the century.
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this panel. I'm delighted to be taking part. So at the Whitworth in Manchester, we started off with a sort of a really good long look at how we were going to bring our collections and what we do closer to our audiences through various sessions online. I think one of the most successful things has been to do with our civic engagement team, who have really brought together a huge online audience to engage with aspects of art through learning and play. And the Whitworth's vision is very much a holistic approach. And so we encourage people to learn about the collections, learn about art and craft through not only coming to exhibitions when that's possible again, but also through playing and making. And so those activities, which the Whitworth is very, very well known for, has continued online and very successfully. So we have been able to do that. In terms of the collections, the work is ongoing a lot behind the scenes, I would say. I've been doing a lot of work with artists in relation to the New Collecting Award and connecting with them and finding out more about their practice and so on and so forth. So it's a combination of various things, I would say.
Thank you so much. Coming to Kamini. Kamini, what do you feel about this entire shift and entire change?
I think the pandemic really changed the art ecosystem quite dramatically. Not only the business of art, the way auctions were held, art was sold and bought, but the way art is exhibited, the way history is preserved and displayed. And also it changed the way people viewed art and the way they experienced art. So until the pandemic, we at MAP were really fixated on the physical space. But when we started having these conversations with our advisory board, the directors, they said, the conversation has moved online. That's where people are. That's where they're able to connect. So we decided that, okay, if people cannot come to MAP, we better take MAP to the people. And so that's when we decided, let's launch a digital museum. So that was themed around art is life, where we wanted to remind people that, art is not just about objects that hang up on the walls of a gallery or a museum, but art is about the way we live. And it was then that we realized how much traditional crafts have been a part of our lives. Art is in the way a sari is draped, in its weave, in its patterns. It's about the beautiful rice flower, patterns that we draw on our threshold, which we call rangoli. It's about the beautiful paintings that women do on the walls of their mud huts, or in the way we decorate our puja room. So it was a way of trying to reconnect people with art, with craft. And we realized that very few museums really have indigenous art as part of their collections. And we felt that craft was so integral to Indian art traditions, and it was important to sort of collapse these perceptions of so-called high art and low art. And that's why in all our exhibition planning as well, for our digital exhibitions, we've not looked at it, our object or our collection in vertical silos, but we've tried to make connections across the collection. So that's what we've been doing so far during the launch of the digital museum was quite significant for us.
Very, very interesting. Manisha ji, you've been an artist, an artisan, an interior and architecture person, so it's interesting. What is your point of view? I mean, you've seen both the parts. So what's been your experience in that?
First of all, I thank India Craft Week and I'm really honored to be in this panel. Being an artist, pandemic had lots of changes in our life, be it economical and looking at the time you are producing your work. So as an artist, as I've said, that most of the artists got a lot of time to rethink of what they were doing. And in our villages, lots of artists, they said they could manage and they were doing lots of artwork. And as all the panelists said, we have experienced that, all the artists, they came more on the virtual panel. And what has happened is that it has connected all the artists. So that is a very important change which has happened, and you could visually, interact with each other and, talk to each other. And what at Madhubani Art Center we did is that, along with other platforms, we arranged a lot of interviews, artist interviews with the masters, like Gopal Sa, all the Padma Shris, and so all the artworks which were in our collection, maybe since of 70s, 60s, which generally we sell as an artist, we forget about it. So we bought them on the platform, had all these artworks displayed, and they talked about it. And that's how it was like, lots of more than 6,000 people in one talk could view all those artworks and interact with the artists. So that was very important connection between all the artists and the community and the total art world. And also not only Madhubani, I feel all the art, other art forms of our country, we got connected. So that was a very positive aspect, but there were very negative aspects also, like, because there was no physical exhibition happening. So the melas, generally craft, which is sold in melas, that was not happening. So economically, it was not so good, but then intellectually and on a virtual connection, it has brought people together. So that's a very important thing which has happened with us as an artist, I feel.
That's fantastic. I'm coming back to you, Divya, and this is very important because, when people talk about digital, right? That's fine, something which has an organic evolution versus something which is very, very fast and, immediate. So that was the event which we saw. So in your experiences, especially because, I remember when I visited V&A and I looked at, 50 years of Christian Dior, there was a fantastic show which was there. The entire experience was so amazing. It was larger than life. I could really see those kind of, work which is being produced by masters. So do you think that, a physical experience, which is of a certain grandeur versus, what has been now happening digitally, the audience is more involved in terms of experience, or you think that there is a fallout and things are actually, not happening the way it is actually happening in terms of, building experience?
Well, they are different experiences, physically going into a large immersive space in which, a lot of money has been spent on the interior, and you're experiencing something, very physical, almost very tactile, because you're so close to the object. The digital experience doesn't give you that experience, but it does give you something else. Why is it that we use film inside exhibitions? It's because we can show something else. So, for example, showing the workshop of an artisan, having conversations with the artisan, which you can't do within an exhibition space, but you can do digitally. There are one of the sort of things I was suggesting that we look at, and I think we're going to post a link to it, is a video that we did of the conservation of a historic jama, which is a craft in itself, the conservation of a 19th century costume that's falling apart. People are fascinated by how things are made, the intricacy and the detail of that. So that experience isn't possible. People can't go into a conservation workshop and see it happen. They can't go into an exhibition and see it happen, but we can give them access to it through that video, which goes into detail about the science that goes into conservation. It goes into the various people involved. It really increases the value of the skills and training that are required to do that. And I think that's the same, obviously, for artisans, getting close-up videos of how they work, the skills and training that go into their work. It's all about increasing value. So I've sort of gone into many things, but I think the two experiences are different. They are, the digital experience offers different types of value, and the physical experience of going into an immersive exhibition there'll always be a differentiation. You don't replace one with the other, but you do integrate them. You take the best of both.
That's fantastic. And this is very, very important, what you said, is both are different kind of experiences. And that is, what needs to be really remembered in mind, that, one must not think that they are substitute to each other. Rather, they are complementary to each other. And that is making, the more experience more holistic. Uttara, you were talking about, I remember, when we had some preliminary conversations, you had given some very amazing examples of how technology is being used in actually, bringing a different kind of experiences, during this time. So can you please share some examples, which you can share with our audience in terms of, what did you do and what exactly was the kind of outcome which was there?
So when I curated the exhibition Beyond Borders, which was an exhibition about South Asian textiles, one of the items that we loaned from an organization in Mumbai called Thoughtpot was a handmade, hand-sewn Godari quilt. And the process of speaking to Tapan and the organization there and the women who were tasked with making this fantastic quilt was a really rich experience. And it was through that connection that they were able to put together an amazing film that showed the actual processes involved and the skill and the careful kind of piecing together of the different selections of materials and the overall design that Tapan Mittal Deshpande put together really came to life on the film. So we had the Godari quilt on display, and then we also had the link to the film that people were able to access online, which then opened up audiences to people beyond Manchester. The Whitworth being in Manchester isn't in London, so people have to make a special trip up north or fly into Manchester. Why not, when you can? And so it was really important that we connected the audiences here and in India, and also the actual people who were involved in making this quilt. That was really, really important to me, to make sure that they had a sense of empowerment and achievement, to understand, for people to come to an international space like the Whitworth and see their work on display. For me, it was a very special moment. So we had that, and then we also loaned a piece from Shrujan. I have long-standing links with Ami Shroff. Hello, if you're watching. If you're not watching live, why not? So we've been backwards and forwards I've been backwards and forwards to Shrujan and love everything they do. So it was really important as well that we had a piece from their collection that was also put on display. So yeah, I think what Divya is saying is right. It's, and what you're saying as well, Sumesh, it's complementary, and it's such a huge privilege to be able to have access to artists and artisans, and to be able to see how they work, where they are working. It's not just about creating this haloed privileged space in an exhibition or a museum. It's very much a reciprocal exchange, and we learn from each other. These these exhibitions that we put on as curators and as organizations, we get so much from talking to people who are actually, you know, at the chalk face, making these pieces, sourcing them, growing the actual fibers or the plants that go into dyeing these cloths and so on. So yes, it's opened up actually a lot more possibilities, which I think is very exciting.
That's incredible. And, in fact, this all technology's root, in terms of, in fact, there's a very interesting word which is coming to my mind at the moment is museums beyond boundaries, So, I mean, of course, each city, each country, everything, had a museum in specific. And I remember when I was studying at NIFT. So my first year has actually gone at Calico Museum, where I actually sat there and did all my education, where be textile science, textile tradition, everything. So it's been a very important experience. Now coming to Kamini, you played a very pivotal role, and you said that established the first digital museum. Now that concept itself is very, very intriguing. So can you please share a bit more about it? That what is this digital museum? How does it operate? What does it do? So that people understand that okay, physical and digital museum, what are the kind of difference it is?
Yeah. So what we did was we created a whole platform, a viewing platform for the museum. So, and which recreates the whole experience of entering a physical museum where you actually wander through the exhibitions, you wander through the collections, you have various events that you can go to, you have blogs that you can read. But we were very aware that this had to be created for example, the exhibitions. They had to be created in very specifically as digital entities, not as exhibitions that you visualize in a physical space and then are just retrofitted into the digital space. So, and let me say at the outset that the pandemic may have changed the way people experience art forever, but I hope the magic of the physical space will always prevail. But it is true that viewing habits have changed and viewers have much shorter attention spans because what you are competing with content that is not usually on the same platform. For example, if I go to a museum, that's the space I'm going to. But when I come on to see a museum on the digital space, I'm competing perhaps with Amazon Prime, or I'm competing, with different other channels like that. So, so we were very aware of that when we were visualizing our exhibitions and whatnot. So I think it's important to exploit the tools that this medium offers. So for example, the digital space lends itself to oral histories, films, sound clips, all of these work very well here and they are very useful in storytelling. So for example, when we did our exhibition on Guribai, the Beal artist, the exhibition was called My Life as an Artist and it was put together in collaboration with her. So this was the first time such an approach had been adopted in exhibiting her work because a curatorial team actually traveled to Bhopal to meet her, to record interviews and discuss how the exhibition should take shape. So these conversations then form the basis of the exhibition's narrative. And the exhibition also turned out to be very timely because she was awarded the Padma Shri, so it, I think, worked very well. So what the digital experience does, as everyone else has mentioned, is that it allows you in some ways to get up really close, to zoom into a work, to examine it at leisure, to keep coming back at will, as it were. So I think these are the advantages of this space. So in a way, you win some, you lose some.
Interesting. Now that brings a very interesting question, Manisha ji, because you are an artist, So when I, for example, put something on Instagram, it said aspect ratio 1:1 or 16:1. Now the interesting point is, if the migration is now moving on to digital platforms, is it going to impact also your ability and ways and methods of making different kind of art forms, or their proportions, or the kind of detailing which you do, or or the multimedia aspect which is possible now with the with the digital support? So what is your point of view? Is it going to change the way you are working, or it is going to remain the same?
I think it'll remain same, but then definitely the way it is presented will be different, because as everybody has said, it's complementary. Nothing can replace a physical exhibition where you experience, you touch, and you see and you meet. But then I think virtually it has brought a very dynamic change, and everybody's connected, and everybody can zoom in into. I could get into Godavari. That's she was interviewed so many times. 93-year-old artist who cannot walk. From her house, everybody could see and experience her experience. So I don't think so. The technique would, in fact, I found it reverse, because when a master artist is talking about her technique, she couldn't have done it physically, been to a physical exhibition, but she could share her experience. So I feel that it was revival of knowing what the technique was, because presently it's very all kind of techniques are being used to do a mithila painting, for example. I say that, but the way it is presented, like in one of my talks, Sarmaya, I had with Sarmaya, which is a virtual museum. So they had created a very nice stories about my one painting, and you could see the peacocks moving, and you could see the tree talking. So that definitely is very interesting, and that brings a new scope for artworks, where art can be used in different fields. I feel that, and that gives more scope to the artisans. That if supposing if it goes into digitally, you can make a movie, and one artwork, and you can see, so and so many other artists got influenced with that particular artwork, which was so nicely presented in a form of stories. And also when we talk about stories, each artist, when digitally they got connected, Bhawa Devi shared her stories when she had gone to France, and all what she feels, she still feels about her art and how she practice. I think it is a very good connection for youngsters to learn this art from the masters, because how many people, if we have a exhibition by these masters, how many people from different country can visit them? But then, as as said earlier, that it can be once it's recorded, I can see as many times possible all these masters, hear them. And also I took lots of workshops with youngsters, like college. I think I took all the NIFs and IDs and so many workshops. Like I've taught more than 1,000 in these pandemic, maybe more than that. So that is a very important door which has opened, to the students, where all the teachers are accessible just by a click of the button. And now the artisans are also changing as per the time. They are getting tech savvy. They are being trained to how to operate your mobile and take a workshop on mobile. So I think those are positive changes, but still I feel nothing can replace a physical exhibition.
It's very interesting, coming to Divya. One of the very important, aspects of, any craft exhibition or being part of a gallery or a museum is, what goes behind the scene, as we say, when the film actually is being made. So, there are a lot of, artisans, I'm sure that they are hearing our conversation also. And most of them, established ones, of course, they have the idea that how to approach in museum and what goes into curation, etc. But there are so many people who are not aware of it. So, coming from a vast experience of yours, would you be able to share, that how this entire curation happens, how acquisition happens, and in physical one, and of course, and how do you see this thing changing with the virtual formats?
Sure. Can I just say one thing? I was fascinated by what Manisha said in terms of the connection with that entire range of artists, that it would have been wonderful for the rest of the world to see it, in terms of just hearing those conversations from master artisans, because that's something that we don't get. So that's quite fascinating to hear about those connections. Okay, so on to your question about curation and craft curation. So usually an exhibition takes at least 3 years to bring together, if not more, and relies on a lot of background or research, a lot of already pre-existing knowledge. So if I talk about Fabric of India, which is my most recently co-curated exhibition, which I curated with my colleague Rosemary Krill. You know, Rosemary had a long, almost entire career based on textile history. I was more responsible for the contemporary, modern contemporary sections, and it took 3 years to hone in on what we were trying to say in the exhibition. Certainly my sort of process of collecting and acquiring from India began a few years, at least 3 years before the exhibition happened. Just getting myself familiar through various people in India to who, what was being produced, who should I go and talk to, who should I go and listen to. And so, you make connections, you go out and do field work. So one of the areas that I went to was Gujarat and to Badoji and to the craft communities there, and acquired directly from the artisans based there. So, we've got a lovely piece by Aziz and Suleiman Khatri and other artisans from that region. So we go out, so I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of research before we acquire. Where we can acquire directly from the artisan and we can physically make the trips ourselves, we will do that, but it's not always possible. So sometimes you'll have intermediaries. Obviously the exhibition is, so when we acquired from the artisans themselves, we do have, there's always with the museum, there's paperwork to fill in. So you go equipped with forms that talk about why we're acquiring something. Obviously you explain them in the language, you have to be able to speak the language, that makes a big difference. But you can have, you have conversations about how that piece is produced, how long it took them to make it, who else did they use within their workshop, because it's quite often not one person, it's lots of people who are involved in the process of dyeing and tie-dyeing and then dyeing and so forth. So you use that opportunity to get to know about the artisans, about the work that they produce, that particular piece that you have chosen from the things that they showed you. You get as much information as you can, followed up by paperwork. And then you bring it back to the museum and then you go through a whole other process of physically acquiring it into the collection. If you're talking about, as we were with Fabric of India, I was also looking at the work of contemporary designers and their work with artisans. In that instance, we try very hard to get not only the designer's name, but the artisan who might have woven that sari, or who might, it's not always possible, but we try very hard. And one of the, problems, as it were, with our 19th century collection, for example, is that we don't know which artisan made those pieces. They were never named. It was not a process that were, they're anonymous in that way. They're beautiful pieces, but we don't know. So we try and remedy that for the future. And for anything that we try and do, I'll always ask, do you know the name of the artisan? Can we note that down? So that we change things for the future. Acquisitions is not an easy thing. We try and it's project focused. So that doesn't, because we were looking at textiles, I was collecting textiles. If we now do a project on ceramics, I will look and speak to you and others about who should I speak to about contemporary ceramics and what's being made. So we don't sort of randomly go out and collect anything and everything, but we do specify our project, because we also have funding that we have to secure in order to do these things, and we have to fund our trips to be there and to do these exercises. So I guess the key things are, it takes a long time. The process is long. We need to physically see the object, to feel it, to touch it, etc. So so that's part of the acquisition process and the research. But the benefits are that we have a fully documented piece in the collection. Sorry, I've gone on a bit. I'm sure there's other things.
That's fine,
but,
absolutely.
I don't want to take up too much time.
That's very important, because most of the artisans never have this clarity, because they always feel that they do a good work, so why museum is not picking up their pieces, So
I understand. It's always the way, and it's hard for us as also to say, we're not acquiring in that field now. I have to say, it's a very difficult situation, but we try very hard to be project focused.
Absolutely. So coming to Uttara, the point is now I was talking to Divya about the physical format, and I would request you to share your digital experience. So now the format is changing, the tools and technologies are changing, the interface is changing. So what do you think that what kind of acquisition is going to happen in future, and what's going to happen? So if you can share some insights into that.
It's a very, very interesting question, because as Divya has said, we're not in a position, museums are not in a position to collect absolutely everything. We have to be selective, and we have to be very focused on what we're doing. And I would echo the sentiment that that it requires a huge amount of fundraising, and there's a lot of that application that goes, those processes for those applications takes a huge team effort across the different teams within the gallery and the museum to make that happen. I think there's an issue of physical space in any museum, in terms of where they are storing their new acquisitions, how they are storing it. And there will come a time, and all museums go through this process. They sort of take an audit, I suppose, an overall look at what's in their collection, what's being duplicated, what is it that they can deaccession. Are we able to tell this story or this part of history through this object or this textile, rather than one that was collected a few years ago? Or does it tell a different story? So we always look at what the gaps are in the collection, how that can be improved, how that can be narrated in a fresh and contemporary way, and give that, ensure that there's that level of accountability through the museum back to the maker or the artisan. So that's really fundamental. But I think museums need to think about how they're going to expand their archives and storage areas. And if this pandemic has allowed us access to craft makers and artisans in countries and in locations where perhaps they have their own archive, then is there a way of digitally connecting with that in a way that opens up and informs pieces in our own collections? So I think there's a lot of potential to explore. It does, however, require a lot of teamwork and people coming together within an organization to make these things happen. There's one thing I just would also like to say is that having been to India several times, there's a wonderful relationship that people have on an everyday level with artisans, and that accessibility to artisans is something that in the UK we would have to really go and seek out and look for. The idea of being able to see how a product, a garment is made from scratch is something that pretty much anybody can go and access over there in India, that you'll know places that you can go and see this happening. Whereas here, the idea of having something tailor-made, handmade, attracts a huge price, and also there isn't a ready network or way of connecting with people who are making these things unless you know them. And I think there's an opportunity for museums to bring that process of making, which I always find quite magical, into a more public domain.
Very, very interesting. In fact, that brings to a very important point, and I will come back to Kamini for that. Kamini, this, from physical to digital to, to fully digital, or, whatever the change would be. But one question that comes to everybody's mind is that who will be the owner of that, and who does this IP or copyrights so to say belongs to. And I mean, what is the format, or what is that thing? I mean, digitization is going to change. So can you please share some viewpoints on this, that what is going to happen?
Before I do that, I'd really like to develop further with the points that both Divya and Uttara raised regarding, the whole problem of acquisitions, the budgets that you need for them, the storage, the insurance. So I really think that collaboration is the way forward. Why aren't we coming together as museums to share what we have? So if I have a collection and I have a gap, why am I not borrowing it from you? And so that's a project that MAP developed during the pandemic, which was called Museums Without Borders. So what Museums Without Borders did was it said that if objects and people cannot travel, then why don't we make them travel virtually, so that audiences from across the world can view maps, objects, and we could, our audiences could view objects from across the world. So what this Museums Without Borders actually did was it took an object from map and it juxtaposed it with an object from the partner museum. And this could be based on commonalities or differences in themes, in geographies, in mediums, artists. And these whole conversations were articulated by the curators from either side. And so when you put objects in conversation, you just get some really interesting dialogues that come across. And the idea of the whole project was really to share these collections, these ideas, skills, and partnership between museums. And I really think that's the way forward, and that's what we should be doing. And to answer your question on who owns it, well, this is just as you have things in the physical space, you have things on the digital space as well. And I think the copyright still always rests with the artist. I mean, that I don't think there's any argument about. I think the copyright would always remain with the artist. And it would function exactly like a physical museum would in terms of what you put up and what you present in terms of content. That would be owned by the museum, and the copyright would still rest with the artist.
Very, very interesting. Manisha ji, what is your point of view on this? This is a
So you had seen the exhibition Likhya, and when I just heard about acquisition. We did reverse. I worked, at IGNCA in 14 years. We created 100 paintings, and like I was invited by the director there to do something with women. So what I did was I invited all these women artists from different villages, and in we did 100 paintings by these 200 women artists on Ramayana, Mahabharat, Madhushravani, and these were 22 feet by 10 feet long panels, which is in collection with IGNCA, and half part is in my collection in Madhubani Art Center. So it was like, actually documenting not only the stories, the artworks, the artists, because we worked with all the masters, and also the youngest participant was 18-year-old. So in that way, we were passing on the whole tradition to the next generation, and that's how we documented the full all the stories and all the panels, which was, you have seen that exhibition, and it was really appreciated. And then we documented. I wrote all those stories in English and in Maithili, in our language, and we came up with this book on Madhushravani and also Likhya, which show me where anybody can see those paintings and just experience it. So it was like, bringing all the artists and the art together on one platform. And also for the first time and I did this in 14 years. It was not very quick. So in 14 years, we did 100 long panels, and then we documented all the artisans, and they shared experiences with each other, because there were a lot of conflicts when Madhubani paintings come. There was conflict about caste system, and so that whole barrier broke. So that was very interesting, and my experience goes reverse actually in collection and acquisition and presenting things to people and people public.
Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So now we have last 12 minutes. So what I will do is I'll pick up 3 questions, from the audience. One from museum perspective, one from academic perspective, and one from artisans perspective, and I would like to have your quick reactions on this. So first from artisans perspective, because we got at least, 10, 12 reactions. And, one of the very interesting question is that they have a belief, or this is a perception. And I'm sure that, after hearing you, it will break down. The perception is that museums often prefer or always pick up, known or established artists. They don't give, opportunity to the new or emerging or budding, artist. So that's the kind of, impression which most of these artisans have. What do you have to say? I'll begin with you, Divya.
Yes, there is a little truth to that. We do, from a kind of almost safety perspective, being in the UK, we sort of think, okay, these master artists have risen to that acclaim because they've been established, they've developed their career over years. If we have a limited amount of funding, what are we going to acquire? We'll speak to the relevant people, and invariably they'll always pick a master artist. But having said that, if there are certainly, so if I'm looking at work now by established artists, we might not be able to afford them. So that pushes us to look at some of the more younger generation artists coming up. But we do need a conduit. We need something to show us what the younger generation are doing. We can't all, we'll come and do our visits, but before that, all the preparation in terms of doing an acquisition visit requires us to speak to art colleges or to speak to people of the community to tell us that it's not just the established artists, but come and have a look at these interesting works. So there is a truth to us acquiring established artists, but we're open to acquiring others. We just need to be shown where they exist and what we should be looking at. So it's something that we have done. So pieces that I acquired some time ago from Pakistan, for example, were acquired as student works. Mm-hmm. Now those artists have gone to the point where we cannot afford them. So it is having the connections to find the student work and then to make a decision to acquire. And I'd just like to say, in terms of acquisitions, it's not just me as a subject, making that decision. It comes back to an acquisition committee who have to approve it. So there are many people involved in that decision.
Interesting, very interesting. What do you say, Uttara, about this particular thing?
So I can speak of my most recent experience, and that was through the Art Fund New Collecting Award. And that process allowed me to scope out and discover a range of artists, women artists working with textiles across Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, and from the diaspora in the UK. And what I was looking for was not necessarily established artists, because of the ways in which art education has been made accessible to women, or they've negotiate cultural, financial, political barriers to make their way into the art world. So I was really keen to consider a range of different a range of artists at different points in their career. So they were emerging to mid-career to more established. So from Pakistan, the artist who was selected was Rahana Mungi, who also is an established artist, but also has a faculty post. And then we also acquired work from Arshi Ishad Ahmadzai, who works between Delhi and Kabul, and Raki Paswani, who's more established, and Yasmin Jahan Napur from Dhaka, and also an organization called Art Pro, who work with a lot of community groups out in Bangladesh. And like Divya said, it goes through a whole process. In my experience with this particular award, I also had the guidance of a mentor, Dr. Shona Datta, who was instrumental in helping me, advising me, connecting me not only with artists and art fairs and biennials, but also the art schools, and meeting with the professors, going into the studios, seeing the work of students who were enrolled in a variety of different programs. So it was a very rich and rewarding time, and the artists who've been selected from the diaspora, I understand, will be announced shortly, but that hasn't, the final decision hasn't been made yet. So yeah.
Very, very interesting. So what I'm basically, going to now put across, another question to, another two panelists. So, very interesting is that there is a question, which has come from an institution, a fashion institution and design institution, So they were telling that what exactly, the role of museum, that should come in basically in terms of, in terms of defining the pedagogy or defining the curriculum, so that there is more and more engagement and involvement of a museum into, not only just introductory subjects, but mostly into major research works, which is more intensive, more things. So, Kamini, can you please suggest that, what kind of role, a museum should play?
I think a museum plays both of these, because I think research is also a very important aspect of what we do. But it's also important for us to be able to connect with audiences, because ultimately we are talking about the objects that we have in our museum. And it's important to unlock these stories that these objects can tell, and also to make it very relevant to the lives of people. So they need to understand. Otherwise, a museum can be, at least in India, people look at museums as these fuddy-duddy places which they certainly don't want to visit. I mean, if you give people a choice between visiting a mall or a restaurant or a museum, I don't see anyone breaking down the doors to enter the museum. So the idea is, how do you tell people about the relevance of what the museum holds to their lives? How is this object to what I do today? So it's important to explain that this tells you about your past, who you are, where you came from, why do you eat the things you do, why do you dress the way you do. So your objects in your museum really tell them about, they can provide you clues to your future as well. So I think it's very important that museums also understand their role in research. But I think that should be in collaboration with academia, because even universities and those kind of institutions also play that role. And I think we move in tandem there. But I think it's also very important to speak the language of the community, and for us to be also in sync with what people can absorb and what they can enjoy, listen, learn, and enjoy and absorb.
Very interesting. Manisha ji, you have a lot of students from all over the world coming and working with you, doing research projects all across. So, what has been your feedback? How there should be more engagement, from the academic side?
I think it's very important. I'm just representing one tradition. Like most of the students I get, they're doing some research on PhD on Madhubani painting. So I always tell them that, first of all, you have to learn ABC. Like we say that if you don't know the basics. So that's very important for us, the teachers or the museums, where if I talk about Mithila painting, there's a lot of symbolism which has meaning. It's not just and every artist has a style. It's not just the stacks of paintings which you see in some art or anywhere, because it's a very big tradition which is coming since thousands of years. So it's very important. Like I have students from fashion schools and so many interiors and architecture everywhere. So I think the museums can play a very important role by documenting the tradition. Because if I talk about Mithila paintings, like if we don't talk about the stories, the symbolism, because all the folk art, if I just talk about folk art, it has a lot of symbolism. Fish is a symbol of evolution and a new beginning. Lotus is symbol of, how you multiply in your life. Like if it's not written, these are all oral traditions which are coming down from centuries. So it has to be documented somewhere. And also in folk art, each artist himself is a living museum. So it's very important to document them. And that's, I feel it's most important. And that's what I started in that whole thing only. That's why I started writing books, because I feel it needs to be written somewhere.
No, absolutely fantastic. That's a great suggestion. And my last question. So, I mean, let me see how many panelists I can frankly, ask to speak. So, we are beginning with you. There are many museum curators and, people working in museum also watching this program. So, they are on a crossroad, so they don't know. I mean, there's a transition between physical to virtual. So what is your advice to, them? I mean, where this entire direction is going to go? So if you can please, convey some, something very interesting to them, that will be of great help.
I don't think it's a sort of complete linear transition from physical to virtual. You have to make both work together. And the one thing I would say is that with relation to craft, what the virtual can bring to the physical is that it can help to raise the value of craft. So if you are able, as we've learned through experience, everyone wants to know how to make things. They want to know about how things are made. So if your question, if I could do that for every single object in our gallery, virtually, somebody can, look at their app and say, this is how this was made. It would do amazing things to raise value and appreciation of craft. And hopefully that would then relate to, equitable payment for crafts, all the things that are really quite important to the artisan. So I think if that's what I would like to add. And there's one sort of other thing, in terms of how we as a museum can help to revive and in these revival projects, is that we have historic pieces from which artisans can learn what that craft was 100 years before, and that's where another place where we can assist with that. So we have, actually I'll stop there because I know there's only 1 minute, so go ahead. Sorry.
No problem, absolutely. I think it's a brilliant conversation with all of you, and I would really, again, like to thank all the panelists, who's come today, spare time, such valuable time discussing, this very important topic. And I'm sure that, as this is just been the beginning, and frankly, there will be so many questions. And of course, British Council as a partner, we'll urge them that, if we can organize more of such kind of series, it will be very useful for everybody. So thank you very much for joining, and I wish you a great day. And thank you so much, all the listeners, all the viewers, for this wonderful, and being patient hearers. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.